Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Bolger and my guest is Dr. Ivan Stratov. Welcome, Ivan.
Thanks for having me.
I believe they named a suburb after you. It's called Ivanhoe.
Well, actually I was born in Hobart and moved to Ivanhoe, but I do live in Ivanhoe still, and it's a very nice place to live, so I never forget where I'm from.
Cool.
Ivan from Ivanhoe.
That's the way. That's what I thought too when I heard it. So you can't be Taz from Tassie, right?
No.
It doesn't go down quite the same way.
Might have been Bart from Hobart.
Well, there we are.
That was my friend.
Okay, so your family mix, the DNA mix, is really quite interesting. A good Aussie woman for mum and a Russian for dad.
Yes, that's right. My father emigrated in 1949, came across after the Second World War and the difficulties of that, and spent 2 years in a tuberculosis sanatorium in Germany, but eventually made it to Australia and met my mother, who's fourth-generation Australian. I think her relatives came out during the gold rush era back in the 1850s, so yeah, and they got married in 1963, and then I came along.
Okay, so you're now not a twinkle in their eye, but here you are.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's right, yeah.
All right, now, what was the greatest influence during your growing up, sort of to mid-teens? What was your worldview?
Well, look, I grew up in a suburban home and just kind of went to the local school and high school. My father influenced me a lot. Those are the difficult times, I suppose, when the Cold War was at its highest. And we, of course, had a lot of rhetoric coming out of America about the evil empire. And my father, of course, whilst he knew that there was a lot of problems with the Soviet Union, and he grew up under Stalin, and he knew Stalin wasn't a saint, he certainly defended a lot about Russia and I guess some of the, shall we say, the ideals anyway of what communism might have represented, and tried to give me a different perspective. And he was always proud, I suppose, that in some ways that the Soviet Union was, took up, I think, a sixth of the world's land mass and had first sent a man into space and had achieved many great things. So I suppose I grew up with a worldview that was trying to balance those two, and I guess I grew up in that era. My mother was also a little bit leaning in that way, and I guess to marry a Russian in the 1960s wasn't exactly a normal thing to do. So I grew up in a leftist leaning, you might say, household, and we had those types of thinking going on in the home. And when Whitlam won the 72 election, there was elation in our home. So we kind of grew up down that kind of way of thinking, and I grew up, I guess, in that atmosphere of... Yeah. And certainly in terms of any religious education, whilst I did go to an Anglican boys' school, and I went to a Russian Orthodox school on Saturday afternoons to study or to learn the Russian language, religion was definitely considered opium for the people, shall I say, in terms of our household. So I kind of grew up in that kind of way, but otherwise, I played sport. I went to the local scout group in First Eaglemont and played cricket for the local cricket team and for the Ivanhoe Football Club. So played tennis and kind of did all the normal things that an Aussie boy should do. And played chess, which I guess not Aussie boys did, but my father, being Russian, liked to teach me chess. So I had a bit of influence from that and a bit of influence from that.
So did you ever beat Dad?
Very rarely, maybe a couple of times, but no, he was too strong for me. But we used to follow the World Chess Championships. Of course, Bobby Fischer against Spassky was a famous Russia against America. It was pitted the kind of the Cold War animosities in a chess match. The brilliance and the kind of erratic behaviour of Fischer versus the stoic and schooled methods of Spassky. Unfortunately for my dad, in that one, Fischer won, but 3 years later, Karpov was able to regain the crown for the Soviet Union. So there was a bit of that going on in our household as we grew up, and I kind of thrived on it and enjoyed it.
Well, that's a very rich upbringing. It certainly gives you another side of the coin to look at.
Yeah, well, it was different, I guess, than just the standard, maybe Anglo-Saxon that many of my other, in those years anyway, grew up with, many of my peers grew up with.
Great. So what moved you into medicine? Where was the passion there?
Well, my mother was a nurse, and academically I did quite well. And I guess when I finished year 12 and I got the marks as we did in those days and was able to apply for medicine, I was planning to apply for engineering. My dad was an engineer, so I guess I was going to go one way or the other. But when I got the marks, my mother encouraged me to think about it, and I thought, well, perhaps I'll do it. And her influence got me to apply for a medical course, which I was able to get into. In 1984, I started my medical degree at Melbourne University.
Okay, so started and finished it in 6 years.
Yeah, in 6 years, 1989, I graduated from medicine. In fact, it was during those years, however, that I guess started thinking more about religion and faith in God, having grown up as an atheist. In an atheist household, I was influenced by a friend of mine who invited me to his church group on a Tuesday night. They used to have just activities at the church, and whilst I used to go to his house mostly during the week, he was never there on a Tuesday because he was down at the church group, so I attended there. And I guess in those formative years when you're going through your teenage years and you're thinking, well, do I hang out with my schoolmates? Do I hang out with my neighbours? Do I hang out with my sporting team? I guess their lifestyle was very pleasant to me. The things that they lived, the way that they lived, and it was different to maybe some of my peers, the way they were now sort of going down the ways of youth, shall we say. I guess that was a big influence on my life, how my friend lived, and it made me think a lot about, well, what is the purpose in life? And I guess going into medicine, where you spend your time looking after people's lives, I guess it was a big moment in my life in those sort of 17, 18, 19 years old. I'm thinking about what is life about and what is the purpose and where am I going?
So you move from looking up into space and knowing that Russia has the first man, and of course there's no God out there, is there?
Well, that's what my father told me. He says, look, Ivan, Gagarin flew into space and there was no God up there, so that issue has now been firmly proven and you don't have to worry about that anymore. And I thinking, well, yeah, is that right? Maybe he's right. And then I was looking at my friends and going, well, hang on, people still seem to believe in God, and these people aren't the kooks or the fools that maybe I was led to believe they were, that only perhaps sick people who were dying or elderly people who didn't know any better, or perhaps uneducated people would believe in God, but yet these people were normal. They were playing sport, going to school, getting an education, and yet they did believe in God. So I thought, well, maybe I should find out for myself.
All right, well, just on that note, you're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Bolch and my guest is Dr. Ivan Stratov. Ivan, we were talking about space and God and a few things. You went to Russia in 1991, was it, and studied?
Yeah, I actually did a mission. I did a mission after my conversion, or my realisation that there was a God, that he manifested, revealed his presence to me, and I knew it was true. I knew for myself that it wasn't some brainwashing or some self-suggestion. I knew that God existed. I finished my medical degree, and that took 6 years. And then I took a 2-year break to go and preach, spread the word. And I was called to serve those 2 years in Russia and Ukraine after a very short period in Finland. Yes, and that's right. And I had an opportunity to return to the homeland where my father obviously left, in 1943, and here I was, 1991, returning. He had never returned, and neither had his mother, who'd come to Australia. So that was the first time we'd returned.
And Russia just after that, or communism as we knew it, changed.
Yes, well, that was a massive change. There was still a communist Russia at that stage. Gorbachev was still the General Secretary of the Communist Party. It was still the Soviet Union. And it remained so until just after I left. I left in December 91, which is just when Gorbachev was removed from his post officially. And it was an amazing time, a time of revolution in the people's souls, shall we say, not political, but people were really starting to question, well, what have we been taught for 70 years, you know? And it was a wonderful time to be there and to share in that and to spread the word of God and to teach about God and Jesus and that there is a God who loves you and there is a Saviour. And these people, many people came to the churches, and I baptised people myself there, and now there are thousands and thousands of people who have renewed their faith or become acquainted with Jesus Christ, and it's wonderful.
Yes, so there was an openness there. So here's an unexpected revolution. You come back to Melbourne, and in medicine you take quite a divergent line of study and research. What are you doing?
Yeah, so I came back and did my medical course, did my specialty training, then did a PhD in HIV vaccine research, which I completed in 2005. And since then I've been doing specialty work in infectious diseases generally and specifically in HIV. Both I have an ongoing research interest in vaccines and even cure for HIV, and also treating HIV patients, as well as I have a medical practice based around the eastern suburbs, treating infectious diseases of all kinds.
Yes. So life, here you are trying to sustain life, to add years to people's lives. What are some of the stories there?
Well, of course, one of the most difficult ones was during the 2008 abortion debate, which came in, and the changes to the legislation which came in 2008. Or they weren't supposed to be changed. They were supposed to bring the law into what was happening in society, supposedly. But of course, politicians didn't do that. They decided to also constrain doctors and health professionals in the area of abortion. And I, for one, found that very confronting. And I felt that the government shouldn't be doing that. The government should not be constraining people's consciences, that we have the right to exercise our conscience, and particularly with religion and freedom of religion and freedom of conscience. And that I felt was wrong. So I became involved in life issues more generally, apart from just working in my own church congregation, of which I'm very active and have a role, and of course teach my own family, but I became more involved in the life movement. I got involved with the Australian Family Association. I attended life dinners. I even joined a political party, stood as a political candidate for Family First to assist Neil Angus in the Forest Hill electorate, and he was able to be elected in 2010, and continued to lobby as I could and attend meetings and do whatever I was able to do to try and redress what I think is wrong in this society, that we should be preserving life, that we should be doing things to help people, to help women if it may be, to keep that child, and certainly not compelling doctors or other health professionals to get involved in abortions if they don't think that's right. So yeah, that's really got me involved, I guess, more in politically and socially in these issues.
So in let's put this in a social context and say, all right, let's say HIV, here it is, it's out there in the open. It'd be like saying, okay, we don't want you to have a conscience about giving life to these patients with HIV. You should stop your research.
I mean, I think any law that is trying, I mean, people fought, sort of the Second World War, a lot of it was done to give people the right to have their conscience, to not to be put in jail or to be sanctioned by the law, or to be say, well, these people's lives are not worth keeping, let's let them die. I mean, a lot of, and HIV was, some people who had HIV, a lot of people wanted to do that and say, well, these people have got a disease by their lifestyle, just let them die. And of course, that's a terrible thing. We don't do that. We don't just let people die. We want people to live, and to redress those types of thinkings. And I, for one, have spent my 10, 12 years of my life looking for ways to assist people with HIV, which is a terrible disease and which killed millions of people. Children still die from HIV, people all over the world. And I think that in terms of the laws that came in here, certainly abortion, we should be looking for ways to preserve life and try and keep life and maintain life. And whether it's at the start of life, whether it's euthanasia at the end of life, I think this is another debate we're having in society. And I'm certainly one for saying, no, we don't want to go down this path. This is not the way to go. We want to preserve life so that life is important.
All right, Ivan, on that point, you're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Bolch, and my guest is Dr. Ivan Stratov. Well, we've certainly covered some ground. We're drilling down about a person's conscience and whether we even can exercise it today as laws are being changed.
Well, I think there are many instances where this could occur, and certainly abortion reform bill, Section 8, is one instance where it's already enacted in law, that people can be sanctioned by the law for exercising their freedom of conscience. And there are other bills that are being put forward, such as euthanasia bills, again where doctors or health practitioners or even counsellors sometimes are being roped into this, may, if they have a personal objection or a conscientious objection or religious objection, they will be constrained to find other people who will facilitate those things which they find to be against their consciences.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you're still doing research in HIV/AIDS and that a law hasn't been brought in to sanction you from doing that, from bringing extended life to those who need it.
Well, I think that we see people with terminal illnesses and HIV at one stage was a terminal illness, and many millions of people died from it, from famous people to people who you and I will never ever hear about, who died, in infancy, and who still die. And there's been an enormous political will to have treatments throughout the entire world, and it's been a fantastic effort from the global community to see that. And there are so many other illnesses and so many other conditions where, with a bit of will from the populace and with political will, that life can be preserved, and good, healthy life. And, well, where else but a fetus, with a bit of political will, by giving a little bit of time and a little bit of effort, a baby can be born and have a healthy, productive, for a century, and live a wonderful life. But for the will of people to encourage and find a way forward. And I think that there is not just religious people who think this way, but many, many people, but it's the will, I guess, of people to express and say, hey, no, we can find a better way. We don't want to be forcing people to do things. We can't compel people, but we can find a better way so many ways. HIV is a great example where a better way was found, and people's lives have been extended, and now people are living healthily with a condition that was a terminal condition just 20 years ago.
That's a wonderful outcome. I was interviewing my grandson, of all people, and he was born to a mum who was 15 years of age, and she decided to keep that child, and now he's in the medical profession looking at making devices for folks that amputees and others, those serving in wars and children walking on landmines. And so prosthetics is what he's going to give to the world. He lived. Because
he was given the chance. He was in a situation where maybe another person would have made another choice, but we would like to give people the best choice and the best choice. And I think most people generally feel comfortable with preserving life. I think generally we think that's a good thing.
Yes.
And I think with the will of the people, we can do this.
Yes. Now you have 3 teenage boys, you could say.
Yeah, well, 11, 13 and 15. Yeah.
So they're on an interesting journey of formative years. This is where they learn most, this is where they're influenced most.
Correct. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're trying to give them the best opportunity. We're giving them a spiritual experience. They love to attend our local congregation down in Northcote. They like to go to our youth groups. We give them a good education, secular education. They go to good school. They have sporting outlets, and we want to give them the best opportunity to make the best choices and the ones that will bring them the most rounded life, the most happiness in their life. So I think I'm giving them something that I've found great joy in. I hope that they will. At the moment, they seem to be enjoying that.
Yes. So you've gone through life, and you were saying earlier that when you changed your worldview, it at one level was easy, at another level was hard.
Well, I think change is hard for many people. Many people find it hard to change their outlook on life, their faith. They may find it hard to change who they vote for. They may find it hard to change a lot of things in their life, their habits, and people do find it hard to change. But I think with information, with education, and when the Spirit touches your soul, I mean, if the experiences that I'd been through, other people had been through, I'm sure they would think and feel these ways. And I think that God is there to inspire us. And religion, for me, faith in God is inspiring. And I relish it. Since I was baptised at the age of 18 and went from believing there was no such thing as God to my age, nearly 50 years old. For 30 years I've just loved it. I've served missions, I've served in our church congregations, and I try and influence people for good, and I hope I'm doing that through my work practices. I try and do the right thing, and at home and in my community. And
right. Why do you think there's such a vitriolic response to those who believe in God or are supporting life? And here you are, the full spectrum, HIV/AIDS, you're interested in the life of the fetus and the mum, and the other vulnerable stage of life when we're old. Why is this opposition so venomous?
It is hard to understand. I mean, I think that people just don't understand. I mean, I think that, for example, if we disagree with somebody, for example, let me give an example, say, changing the definition of marriage. People think that if you have a traditionalist view, you're a bigot. Now, I'm not a bigot. Just because I disagree with somebody doesn't mean I'm a bigot. I might say to someone who has a different position to me on something that I disagree with that, but it doesn't mean that I hate that person. But that's the way it's framed, that if I disagree with something, that I hate that person. I don't hate this, but I don't hate, for example, people who support gay marriage, or people who are homosexual, for example. I treat them all the time, gay people. I mean, I spend my whole life researching it, and I love them and I care for them and I do my best for them. But there are some things that I don't agree with. I don't agree with abortion. I think that there's vastly better ways. And I would hope that by preserving life, we see the sanctity of life and the beauty of life and the wonder of life, and that life doesn't have a value on it. And just because somebody doesn't give it a value, I still have a value for it, and I think it's important.
Good. Well, on that note of value and importance, you've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us again next week. Goodbye.